Dear participants, ladies and gentlemen, it is a real privilege to address this distinguished audience on the eve of G20 Brisbane Leaders Summit. I would like to thank Professor O'Connor, President of Griffith University, for giving me the opportunity to speak to you today, as well for his warm welcome and hospitality. I would also like to congratulate my distinguished colleague, Prime Minister Tony Abbott, and his able team for the excellent job done by Australia this year as the G20 presidency. We look forward to continuing our close cooperation with our Australian colleagues in the G20 Troika next year. Allow me to briefly touch upon our bilateral relations, as we have spoken before this session between Turkey and Australia. We will be commemorating the 100th anniversary of Gallipoli battles. This is a very rare case in the history, and we are proud of this. Turkey and Australia became two good friends after a war in Gallipoli, where our grandfathers fought against each other. One of them was my grandfather, who was on Turkish side, and now I am in Australia as the grandson of someone who fought against Anzacs, and now we are friends. This is a very rare case in the history. I hope all other nations will get a lesson from this experience that there shouldn't be a culture of revenge after a war, but there should be a culture of mutual respect and friendship. Whatever happened in the past, happened in the past. For the future, we have to be working shoulder to shoulder to respond the crisis and challenges of humanity. So we are here as friends and as guests of Australian hosts. And after 100 years now, there are 150,000 Turks from Turkey, 190,000 altogether from different countries, Turks, are living in Australia in a very peaceful manner. This is what we dream for the future of other nations as well. And especially after 100 years of First World War, I am sure all of the nations will have to make a reassessment of the history from the perspective of a common destiny. Coming to G20 summit, we are grateful to Australia for excellent presidency and for now excellent hospitality. But we have many challenges in international economics, and we have to be ready for future plans and strategies. When we look at the history of world economy, we can see three phases, generally, as three different historical experiences. One was the traditional economies in the world economy, which was space-centric, connectivity and space-centric, like Mediterranean economy during Roman Empire, or Silk Road economies during Silk Road empires. And throughout Afro-Eurasia, there has been many centuries where there were different practices of world economy, integrated in itself, but not well integrated to each other. And there were several crises in the past in these historical zones, like Mughal invasions and attacks created a political chaos in Silk Road, and Silk Road economy was divided. Or in Roman Empire, when there was a crisis and Roman Empire was divided, the Mediterranean economy has been divided as well. This was the traditional economies, so that if there was a political stability or an imperial structure providing a zone for economic activity, there was rise of world economy. When there was a political crisis, then there was a decline. It doesn't mean that these were regional economies. We know very well that Chinese businessmen were trading with East Africa, even 12th century, 13th century. So there was limited globalization, let me say, like Alexandrian Empire, 4th, 5th century before Christ, when several economic zones and civilizational areas were interconnected. Greeks, Mediterranean, Mesopotamia, Egyptian, even subcontinent. When there was a crisis in world economy at that time, it was responded by political stability after a generation to revive the world economy or the economy of that connected geography. But there was a connection in sea or land. The second phase was modernity, when there was an economy which was connected through certain financial systems and colonial administrations as well, which didn't have necessarily a land connection, like British economy in Britain and in India. It was connected without a land connection, not space-centric, but more structural-centric, let me say, modern economies, mercantilism, industrial revolution, and the space was much bigger, not necessarily connected by like Silk Road or Mediterranean. Colonial economies and modern economies developed a new financial system, a new commercial network, and a new political government administration. Again, that system functioned well in an approach of center-periphery, industrial production and markets. And the crisis of this economy was 1929, a crisis of modern economy. Again, it was much bigger scale than the traditional economy, but much less scale than global economy. A crisis in Euro-Atlantic spread from a center to the periphery, step by step, and it was one of the reasons why we had Second World War, because of this economic decline. It was not the only cause, but it was one of the reasons why there was a certain international environment which created the Second World War. Now we are in the third big phase, which we can call globality, global economics, and global politics. So traditional, modernity, and global economics. Without understanding the logic, the philosophy, and the structural aspects of these three different phases of human history in politics and economy, it is difficult to understand the challenges we are facing today. So 1929 world economic crisis was a crisis of modern economy. But 2008 economic crisis was a crisis of a global economy. You cannot identify just one center of this economy. It is not connected in space. It is connected by technology and by other means than space itself. Therefore, in 2008, when we faced this crisis, before we had 1999 crisis, Russian crisis, Latin American crisis, several other crises, but it was more, they were more located rather than global. But 2008 was a shock for all of us. After the rise of world economy, in volume and in substance in 1990s, there was a hope of the new wave of economic growth because of the spread of new technological instruments. In 2008, it was a shock in the sense that this time the crisis is not so easy to respond. There was a need of a global platform to respond to this crisis. Therefore, G20 Summit, G20 was there, but not summit level. In 2008, to respond to this crisis, G20 did emerge. And it was the right response to this crisis because there was a need of a much widespread global consciousness and global mechanisms to respond to this crisis, because it was a threat to growth and employment, and financial stability were strongly jeopardized. So financial stability was threatened, growth and employment start to decline, which was a clear indication of a global crisis. And global interdependence, first time, became so apparent to have. Without global reaction, it was difficult to respond to this global crisis. And the key term here is global interdependence. So there is a common destiny of humanity. Therefore, we have to understand this common destiny. It was not like crisis before. I want to give an example of climate change. 2-3 years ago, when I was Minister of Foreign Affairs, three years ago, in UN, there was a meeting of foreign ministers on climate change and climate issues. Usually when you are in such a meeting, and if you are an academics, reading a text was boring for me. Still, it is difficult for me to adapt to read official texts. My team is trying to say, read official text. It is much easier, but I prefer to speak from my heart rather than only from my brain. There were several statements before me by other colleagues, and everybody was repeating their national position regarding climate change. I realized that it became quite boring, and I didn't read the text, and I said to my colleagues, there were around 50 ministers, I said, on all other issues, we should act as ministers of foreign affairs of nation states, because we are representing nation states. And as ministers of foreign affairs, our duty and mission is to reflect our national concerns, national strategy to the international community. But when it comes to the issue of climate, we should not act as ministers of foreign affairs of nation states, but we should act as minister of home affairs of humanity. Because arguing each other as representing different conflicting interests of nation states will not solve climate issues. And climate issues are ontological issues, not political. If there is no ontological existence, there cannot be political existence. So if humanity cannot exist, there cannot be state. There cannot be nation states to represent. So when it comes to the issues of climate, we have to act as home ministers of humanity. Similarly, in G20 or in other economic issues, which is affecting not only developed or developing countries, but also non-G20 member states, all humanity. Sometimes we have to speak as Minister of Foreign Affairs, Prime Ministers, or Minister of Finance of nation states. But when it comes to global crisis, Ministers of Finance should act like ministers of all humanity, rather than just reflecting position of nation states. And prime ministers or leaders should not speak only for their own nations, but should address to the needs of humanity. Because we are all interconnected. There is no isolated nation state. There is no isolated nation which can specify their destiny without making reference to other nations. Australia, compared to Turkey, might feel much more secure and safe as a huge island, as a continent island, which is not the neighbor to crisis points. You are not neighbor of Syria, Iraq, Ukraine, or Libya. We are neighbor, so we are not island. But despite of this fact, geopolitically, maybe Australia may feel that it is in a much less risky geography. But financially, nobody is safe and secure, and nobody is an island. Financially, everybody is connected because money flow does not see any borders at this global age. Therefore, it was right response that G20 leaders decided to come together and develop a collective action plan to guide for a strategic guidance for the future of global economy. This is a new way of political governance of international political economy. Usually in this type of cases, like in my academic life, I prefer to talk more political economy rather than just economy or just politics separated from each other. If there is an integrated approach of political economy, where political government or governance being connected to an economic approach in methods, you cannot solve any problem. Last year in a EU ministerial meeting, when my colleagues asked my opinion about Ukraine and Syria, our neighborhood, I told them that there are three categories of countries in the world today. Countries which have vision and capacity to govern, these countries are rising. There are countries where there is no vision, but capacity to govern, they are trying to protect their status quo. But there are certain countries where there is no vision, as well as no capacity to govern, they are declining, like Syria today, or several other countries. So we are living in a very dynamic political and economic environment. All of us, as the leaders of the countries, have to create new visions for our countries and to have a democratic, legitimate, accountable political system in order to have a sustainable economic system. At the same time, we have to act as leaders of humanity, how to deal with the interconnected problems of the system. So there is a need of two levels, politics and economics, even technology in that sense, and also national and international. Responsibilities are not separated from each other, and G20 in that sense is the right platform to regulate financial system and to really regulate financial architecture of world economy, as well as to share national experiences, how to overcome this type of crisis. The substance of G20 Summit, in that sense, is to overcome the crisis and problems of a global economic crisis, but this is just to respond to the crisis. But at the same time, if you are reacting a crisis, you cannot re-establish a new system. There should be a proactive approach in world economy to restructure global economy. Therefore, G20 should act not only crisis response group, but also a steering committee for the future world economy. And the substance in that sense is important, but also the format and the method of G20 functioning is important. G20 is an informal and flexible organization. This is very important. A platform, in fact, not organization. There is no formal rules of membership. There is no final authority to make rules. And there is a need of consensus, informality, and mutual respect. This is a unique experience. And if it is successful, and until now it has been successful, that will be a new way, a new type of political governance. Governance of international political economy. Because there is freedom to set up the agenda. There is no strict rules. It is not World Trade Organization or IMF or others, where there are certain rules and procedures which limits you, which is important. Rules and procedures are important. But if it is too tight, there will be less creativity, there will be more bureaucracy. And G20 until now didn't create a bureaucracy. Presidency has been turned, and every presidency, like today, Australia, and next year Turkey, after 1st December, we have our mission to fulfill the basic agenda and the basic targets of G20, but we cannot impose a procedure, we cannot impose a rule as the presidency. There is presidency, there is troika, there are countries of G20, and here this informality is in fact an asset. Sometimes it was seen as if it is a weakness, but I think it is an asset. There shouldn't be a dominance. It is much more inclusive than international political system, like P5. UN, any country of P5 can block any decision in UN. The rest 192 countries becomes irrelevant if one nation says no, like in the case of Syria or in the case of Palestine or other international issues. Global political system today is much less democratic than G20 mechanism or others. G20 is much more representative. Still, there is a need of representation. But it is at least it is not 5 countries or 3 countries or 8 countries which will block or impose an agenda. This is very important. What we need today in international system, international governance, is inclusivity in every aspect. Without inclusivity, there will be no legitimacy. The problem of UN today is UN General Assembly is inclusive, but UN Security Council is exclusivist in the sense of the special status of certain nations. And therefore, there's always a question of the legitimacy of the decisions of UN Security Council when it is conflicting with UN General Assembly decisions, which is not effective, but more legally, more ethically global and binding. Why I am giving these details? G20 agenda, in that sense, should represent not only 20 countries, but global agenda. Therefore, the relation between G20 and non-G20 countries is as important as the relations of G20 members. In that sense, we need to think new challenges, how to respond to these challenges. Let me give you 2 examples as the new challenges, which is superficially, if you look superficial, it is not connected to G20 agenda. But in reality, it is directly connected to the G20 agenda, like Ebola crisis, pandemics. This is, some people may think that it's a West African crisis. Okay, keep it there. But you cannot be sure. Pandemics, good things and bad things, everything is spreading much faster than the old migrations. They are spreading much faster than the Anzacs coming from Australia to Turkey, or vice versa, Turks coming to Australia in 1960s. Pandemics is a global issue. Is it only health issue? Maybe today, but not for tomorrow. Because it is not only World Health Organization's agenda. We have to think from today, what will be economic consequences of Ebola crisis? Because it will affect labor market of West African countries. It will affect development strategies, growth strategies. If it continues, 5,000 human people died in Ebola crisis. We don't know how many more and how will it affect, like AIDS or HIV issues, all these. Now, so if the G20 agenda is only limited to financial issues, G20 cannot function, cannot have global legitimacy without addressing the issues of other continents. Second, for example, new challenge, which is seemingly a political or military crisis, security crisis, but affecting first national economies, then regional economies, then global economies, refugee issues. In Syria, there has been a war for the last 3 years, and 1.6 million Syrians came to Turkey only. Around 4 million refugees from Syria went to neighboring countries, to Lebanon, to Jordan, to Turkey, to Iraq. Additional 200,000 Iraqis came to Turkey, basically Yazidis. Now, you may think at early stage it is a political crisis, but later stage it becomes a humanitarian crisis. And maybe at early stage only neighboring countries are dealing with this, but later it becomes the crisis of humanity. We spent $4.5 billion US for these refugees in 3 years. And in some Turkish towns, Syrian refugees are becoming more than the real inhabitants. We cannot close our border because they are our relatives, they are our neighbors, but before everything, they are human beings. We cannot close when Assad regime is dropping Scud missiles, barrel bombs, chemical weapons. We cannot say stay there to die. In Lebanon, for example, which is not member of G20, in Lebanon now, almost 1/3 of the population of Lebanon, even more, are refugees. Nobody can say this is Lebanese issue, this is Turkish issue or Iraq issue. It is becoming a regional issue. It is affecting oil prices, it is affecting humanitarian waves, changing demographies. So how to respond to this crisis? Why I am giving these examples that not only it may be G20 summit started with because to respond 2008 global crisis, but at the end of the day, every year we are facing new challenges and we need to address to these new challenges. Now, when we see the Brisbane communiqué and Australian presidency of the agenda to G20, it is very well expressed, very well defined, and there are certain parameters which we agreed before which should be followed by all presidencies, like how to increase the level of G20, GDP level of G20 to 2%, how to accelerate growth in world economy, which will be affected by many other issues. This is very important. Before in G20, around 1,000 policy commitments were agreed upon. And our commitments should be concrete and quantifiable so that we can follow up. So medium-term growth strategy is very important and should not be changed because of the political issues of each nation state. Now, when it comes to Turkish presidency next year, what are our priorities? Knowing the dynamics of international system and seeing the challenges of coming years, we will focus on certain issues to address not only G20 countries, but global economies. First, of course, multi-year agenda of G20s will be followed up, will be monitored, because G20 is not a yearly organization or summit, so there are many multi-year objectives and targets which will be followed by Turkish presidency. But the main agenda, which we will be focusing and projecting for the future, will be development. Development is important for not only for G20 members, but for all the countries. Integrating of developing and low-income countries to international system will be one of the main priorities of Turkey. This is very important. In such a global atmosphere or environment, there cannot be some sort of oligarchic differences of countries. We are developed countries, so we are immune of certain problems like poverty or others. There is no such an immunity anymore. Because of migration, the most poor nations can come to the capitals of the most developed countries. Therefore, I gave the example of refugees. Refugees coming to Turkey is coming from because of this crisis, from a low-income country, and they don't have any job, they don't have any capital, they don't have anything, any skill sometimes. And they are becoming part of your economy through demographic shift. How will you be dealing this? European countries now are facing a new challenge because of the migration coming from Africa. So it means that without integrating developing countries and low-income countries to the international economic system, no country can be immune of any crisis or unemployment. So one of the targets of Turkey will be how to integrate least developed countries as well as low-income countries to the international economic system. This is, maybe you know, Turkey is will not only be the president of G20 next year, but Turkey is coordinating country of least developed countries, LDC, from 2010 until 2020. And 2015 will be review year. When in the first meeting of LDC ministers in Turkey, when I addressed to them, I said this term, least developed countries, should be rejected, to be frank, because I know certain countries which had a very rich historical background and civilizational background in the past, like Nepal. Nepal is the center of spirituality. How can somebody call Nepal as the least developed country when such a place spiritually the most developed? So having 47 countries, least developed countries, LDC, we have to speak for the humanity, as I said. Therefore, we shouldn't be seeing that these, like caste system, these are untouchables, or these are problematic nations, these are fragile nations, low-income countries, etc. And we, selected people of history, are up there as G20 and we have everything, so we decide for them. No. They have to be part of the process. They have to be part of the, at least part of the consultations, if not decision-making process today, but maybe tomorrow. We opened 23 new embassies, 25 new embassies in Africa in the last 4 years. Many African presidents, prime ministers are telling us that there is no African presence, except South Africa, of course, but not the sub-Saharan traditional Africa. Please, in G20, please be our voice in G20. Yes, during our presidency, we want to be the voice of everybody and to set up the agenda so that, if possible, we want to bring low-income countries and G20 countries together to understand each other. So the key term here is integrating everybody to international economics. We shouldn't be looking at Africa as a source of raw materials. They are human beings and they are part of our common destiny. Therefore, UN post-2015 development agenda will be our reference points: poverty eradication and human-centered approach. This is important, human-centered approach. All these financial architecture, beautiful, attractive terms in financial system are for human beings. If they do not address to the needs of human beings, they are meaningless. So this will be important. In order to focus on development, the second complementary subject will be trade. Because throughout the history, trade has been the means of changing not only the goods of different regions or countries, but also the values, as well as the living standards. If trade is only intra-G20, then it means there will be a flow of living standards or good standards among G20, ignoring the rest of the world. Therefore, trade as the engine of development will be promoted, and the role of WTO should be redefined. And Turkey will focus on to revive multilateral trade negotiations, which is one of the most boring and long-standing negotiations. You have to be very patient because everybody wants to sell more and wants to get less in order to be richer. It is like a competition. In fact, we know from the experience of Silk Road, which I mentioned, the best way of common interest and common target is having liberal trade regimes. Everybody should sell to each other. Why do we have trade barriers? For exchanging all these goods, experiences, there should be more integrated trade regimes. 4 or 5 years ago, as Turkey, we declared a new vision for Middle East. When I still remember now, I feel very upset because in 2009, after I became Minister of Foreign Affairs, we declared a policy for peace and stability in the Middle East. We need 4 complementary objectives: a common security and stability zone, second, economic interdependency, third, multicultural coexistence, and fourth, high-level political dialogue. What we learned from the history is the best way of peace is interconnected, interdependent economics. Therefore, we try to have visa liberalization regimes in the region, and we signed visa liberalization with Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and we established free trade zones, Turkey, Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, in 2010, just before the crisis started. And we were telling to everybody that we want to have respect to political borders, but we want to make political borders irrelevant when it comes to trade and cultural relations. If that vision was realized, today we wouldn't face ISIS type of terrorist threats or refugee flows. People would come to each other without any visa barrier or trade barrier, and that economic interdependency would create a zone of political stability. I was giving the example of France and Germany. How many times France and German armies tried to invade Berlin or Paris in the last 400 years? And Alsace-Lorraine was a zone of conflict. When they decided to have a new common market before European Union, then they realized that all these old wars were meaningless. And Alsace-Lorraine region Strasbourg became the center of this common market, and then common market leads to an integrated political and economic zone. Without an efficient trade mechanism, there cannot be cultural exchange. Market is the best place to exchange goods and commodity as well as cultural values. Therefore, all the big cities in the history, they are trade cities. A city cannot develop if it doesn't have a good market in traditional time. And today, the same thing. The rise of a nation or the rise of a region, one of the best indication is market, rise of market and human and good exchange, and communication, of course, transportation, because once you have trade, then you need transportation as well. For example, when Turkish economy is rising, Istanbul is rising, and now Istanbul is one of the best destinations for many people to go to each other. And we are building the biggest airport of the world in Istanbul for 150 million passengers per year. So this trade is important for development and also to encourage creating employment. The third priority of Turkish presidency will be creating employment. Because after 2008 crisis, one of the biggest challenges, not only for other nations, but for the developed countries as well, was rising unemployment. like even France, in Spain, Portugal, Greece, suddenly people lost their jobs. If 6, 7 years ago, if you ask to any Greek citizen or Spanish citizen or Irish, from anybody from Europe, whether they would be losing their job, they wouldn't say no. It was safe and stable, and we are European countries, and I am a professional. I have a good grade or certificate or PhD, so there is no such a problem. But in 2009, 2010, 2011, many of them lost their jobs. So there is no guarantee of economic sustainability of individual living standards. What is the solution? We have to create new jobs. Turkey, from 2008 until now, created around 6 million new jobs. Only last year, 1.2 million. So why, if Turkey didn't create that job, with the rise of demography, Turkey is a young population, today I wouldn't be talking to you as Prime Minister of Turkey. Somebody else would be here in my position. Because no country can, this is political stability and economic stability is linked to each other. Sometimes I was making joke to my colleagues as ministers, whenever we were meeting in NATO or EU, in every 6 months or 1 year, ministers are changing. I don't want to give the name of the countries. I don't want to undermine any country, but I have seen 7, 8 ministers in 4 years from certain European allies. 7 ministers I know from one country in 4 years. Minister of, why? Because of economic instability. When there is an economic instability, there is no political stability. When there is no political stability, you cannot have a sustainable economic program to implement. So this is a vicious circle. You have to cut this circle from somewhere. In 2002, our position was much worse than the situation in any European country. But from 2002 until now, we have a political stability, having a very rational political economy, and budget discipline, fiscal policy, etc. And we created a miracle, and nobody was expecting such a high performance from Turkish economy, and we didn't discover new natural gas resources, or nobody gave us hundreds of billion euros for our economy. What did we discover? We discovered the dynamism of our manpower, human power. Employment is important, entrepreneurship. So this experience we want to share, as well as we want to focus on employment issues. Not only increasing job, but also we need to increase quality of job. Quality of job. And in European labor market today, what we are facing is, and in many European labor markets, but especially the need of job for young generation, and also for women. If there is a participation of youth and women to labor market, that economy is becoming more dynamic, more widespread. This will be our agenda, third agenda in our presidency. Connected to this employment issue, there will be a special reference by Turkey, by our presidency, to SMEs, small and medium enterprise. Usually, if there is a developed economy, the share of SMEs is seen as a secondary role. But in developing economies, if you want to spread employment to all the regions of a country, then you must have certain small and medium enterprise for economic development. And I think for developing economies, as well as for non-G20 non-G20 states, one of the most attractive ways is SMEs, how to support SMEs in that sense. And the fifth priority subject will be energy. Energy, is essential for modern economy and also for global economy. It is interesting, 1/5 of world population does not have access to electricity today. Usually we, citizens of G20, we think that everybody is using electricity. A life without electricity is unimaginable for us. But 1/5 of world population doesn't have access to electricity. All sub-Saharan consumption of electricity is less than only New York. For me, as an observer, the best indication for a country's economic performance or standard of living is the city lights. When you are approaching by airplane, when there is a huge electricity network or city is, especially during night, full of light, that city and that country is developed. In certain countries, when you approached, you can see there is no light, very rare. I remember when we landed to Mogadishu, Somalia, 2 years ago with our Prime Minister at that time, then our President today. There we felt what means underdevelopment. No electricity at all. No hope for the future. Children and babies were dying on the ground. And Turkish plane of Prime Minister Erdogan then was the first plane landing Mogadishu after 20 years. And we are talking G20 agenda in luxurious hotels and other places. We have to connect ourselves to all human beings everywhere in the world. And therefore, energy is an indication. The second indication is the traffic or the road from airport to the city center. You can see whether it is well organized or not. 2.6 billion people still rely on use of biomass for cooking in the world. So our slogan will be like before, access to energy for all. Energy for us as a national issue is also important because Turkey is an energy transit and energy consuming country, but not energy producing. Now we are having nuclear energy maybe in the next 5 years, but therefore the main problem of our economy is energy gap. Our economy is rising, the energy resources are rare, and all the other countries except Turkey around us have energy resources, but they have political crisis which prevents them to send energy to us. So energy will be another important agenda item. And sixth will be investment. If you want to have a job creation, SME, energy, of course, all of them are connected with investment. Private sector is the engine of this area. Developing alternative financial structures like Islamic crediting will be analyzed. And one very specific issue which is important for us for investment, financing investment, as well as development, which is multilateral development bank cooperation. There are many development banks and multilateral development banks. We want to focus on how to share this experience of multilateral development banks to support national economies and to create certain regional economic solidarity for financing investments. Seventh agenda will be climate change. In fact, I mentioned at the beginning, if there is no ontological existence, there cannot be political or economic existence. And the biggest challenge to all humanity today is climate change. Post-2020 climate change negotiation phase, climate change is not the main agenda of G20, but Turkey will focus on these, and Turkey is committed to the negotiation framework under UN approach. We hope a fair, flexible, and inclusive, legally binding agreement will be reached under UN auspices, and that will support also certain sectors in economy. When we look at all these integrated approach, we need to develop new responses to the new challenges, like how to engage non-member countries, international organizations, civil society, business, and labor groups. As I tried to explain, today our economy, no economy in the world, and world economy is not space limited, not Silk Road economy, not Mediterranean economy. It is also not an economy of center or periphery relations between a colonial center and a periphery, or a modern economy where financial sectors developed in certain countries or continents and the others are more secondary, have more secondary roles. We are all interconnected. If there is a very comprehensive challenge in essence, in substance, and in space, then the response should be much more widespread, much more in-depth rather than superficial, and much more inclusive. So Turkish presidency's main term will be inclusivity for all human beings. We will be getting a very good legacy from Australia, and we will be working with Australia as members of Troika, and we hope 2015 will not be only a very meaningful commemoration of Turkish-Australian friendship, but also will be a turning point in world economy for a bright future of humanity. Thank you very much.